Hello everyone. Today's Power BI report will be based on statistical release P0350 International Tourism by Statistics South Africa. As of this recording, the latest release is the September 2024 release. The Power BI report will be based on data from the April 2024 release through to the September 2024 release. Particularly, it'll be based on data relating to the number of tourists by country of residence, as seen here. As well as data on the number of tourists by port of entry, as seen here. So let's look at a bit of the report. Firstly, let's have a look at the tables the report is based on. So after merging and cleaning and processing the data, we have 4 tables on which our report is going to be based on. Firstly, we have the categories table, which includes the countries of residence as well as categorizations of the countries of residence, mainly via region, and connected to this via the country of residence column, we have the table on tourist visits, which contains the date values as well as the number of tourists that came on that date. So dates being month, year pairs. So these 2 tables relate to international tourism. So tourists by country of residence. Then moving on to the ports of entry, we have the table ports of entry data, which includes the ports of entries as well as categorizations by province, and also includes categorization by type, that is air, sea or land port of entry, as well as coordinates for the ports of entries to be used in a map visualization. In addition, we also have links to images relating to the ports of entries, also to be used in our visualizations. We then also have another table which is linked to this via the ports of entries column. So this one contains the data, that is the date, that's month, year, as well as the value, that is number of tourists that visited. Alright, so that's the table form of what's going on. Let's have a look at visualizations in the form of the report view. Firstly, we look at international tourism, so tourists to South Africa from around the world. Our main visualization is this bubble chart, which is of course overlaid over a map of the world, and this is just number of tourists by country of residence, and the countries have been grouped into regions. And so on the right here we have a table, so regions and the number of tourists by region, and under it we have a horizontal bar graph. This report also has a date slicer, so this can only give you a view of a particular month from April 2024 to September. One cannot select multiple dates. And just looking at the bubble chart visualization, we see that the biggest numbers are clustered around South Africa here in the pink category, which is SADC. The blue category, which is Europe, is also reasonably large, and North America, including just the US and Canada, seem also to be of notable size. So looking at the table ordered by value or number of tourists, we see that these are the three regions from which we get the most tourists. And looking also at the bar graph, we see by a major landslide, the SADC region is the region where South Africa gets most of its tourists from, followed by Europe and then North America. A quick edit, since I jumbled this explanation up on the original take. So what we have is this: the map, the table, and the bar graph. So clicking on a bubble on the map will simply highlight that bubble on the map. This will not affect the table, so it will neither highlight or filter the table. The table will still give you a global view of what's going on. It will highlight a bit on the bar graph, so the bit corresponding with that country's contribution to the numbers, and that's the interaction of the map. Now looking at the table, clicking a region on the table will filter the map to that region. Similarly, clicking a region on the bar graph will filter the map to that region. Now between the table and the bar graph, clicking a region on the table will highlight it on the bar graph, but now clicking a region on the bar graph will filter the table to simply show just that region. And those are the interactions. So moving on to numbers by the ports of entry to South Africa. So here we have another bubble chart on a map. The bubbles here don't really represent anything. It's mainly to highlight the locations of the ports of entry. So many of these ports of entries I myself was not really aware of. So I knew that there was likely a port of entry, but I didn't really know the names. So this was pretty interesting for me. But yeah, so the ports of entries are divided up into air, land, and sea, with your air in grey, land in orange, and sea in blue. And if you hover over a particular port of entry, you get the name of the port of entry as well as a small picture. So here we have Waterkloof Military Air Base, we have Bait Bridge, and we have Durban Harbour, as well as a Cape Town Harbour there. Shifting a little, we have Cape Town International Airport. So on the right here we have a bar graph showing the number of visitors in the particular month, which is determined by this slicer up top. So selecting different months changes the values. We just see some shuffling around of the ports of entries and their positions, because we note that they're ordered from greatest number of tourists to least number of tourists. And also to the side above we have a card which changes when one selects a port of entry in any of the other two visuals. So just highlighting the actual name of the port of entry and the number of tourists that went through there. Looking at the numbers here, we have Old Tambo International Airport, which generally stays in the top bracket. That's not very unexpected. We have a couple of the land ports of entry, Lebombo and Great Bridge. Those also seem to be very high, so I didn't know of these previously. And then you have Cape Town International Airport, which is way below these two land port of entries. And yeah, not much on the front from the sea, not many people coming to South Africa via the sea, pretty much land and air, and air is mainly our Tambo International Airport, and that's what you see from the port of entry data. Here we have just a helper tab. So this is what enables the tooltip when hovering over the map. And yeah, that's that. Now here we try and combine some of the data to get some insight. So we have the report, SADC, and neighbors. What's done here is I'm looking at the international tourist data over time, so the distribution of tourists by region. So we see that SADC consistently forms a major chunk of tourists to South Africa, and because of that I created a measure called couple of measures called neighbors. So the measures neighbors and neighbors 2, particularly neighbors 2, which essentially recategorizes the countries of residence. So we recategorize them by splitting out our 6 neighbors. So we now look at the same international tourism data, but splitting out the 6 neighbors, direct neighbors of South Africa from the SADC region. So we have now our 6 neighbors and then the category rest of SADC, and we have Africa aggregating all the other Africa regions as well as the rest of the world. So if one wants to see how that measure was calculated, here we have the calculation for neighbors, and the one that's actually used neighbors 2, so distinguishing our neighbors Lesotho, Botswana, Namibia, Mozambique, Eswatini, and Zimbabwe as being their own category, not combined but separately, and then giving us the categories rest of SADC and rest of the world. So how does this breakdown change? So looking at our individual countries, we see that Zimbabwe accounts for essentially 26% of travel to South Africa, at least for these 6 months, and I mean it's been relatively consistent, followed by the rest of the world. So that's everyone outside of Africa, and then another one of our neighbors, so a bunch of our neighbors now, Mozambique, Eswatini, and Lesotho, making up a huge chunk. Then now the rest of SADC, and then followed by Botswana, and in a tiny segment here we have Africa, rest of Africa, and quite low here we have Namibia. So this tells us, again, it confirms that SADC is the major visitor to South Africa, and in fact, in particular, the major visitor is Zimbabwe, followed by Mozambique, and then Eswatini and Lesotho being the bulk of visitors to South Africa, with the rest of the world being this red slice here. Looking at the interactions, the distribution of tourists by region, this does not interact with any of the other charts, so it just stands alone as a sort of time series version of what's going on here. And thanks to the insight that most of our visitors are SADC, we've decided here to split out some of our neighbors as well as rest of SADC to see how that breaks down. And we notice that Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Eswatini, and Lesotho form the bulk of our visitors, with the rest of the world and Africa, rest of Africa forming pretty much about 25% of our visits. So at the top here, distribution of our visitors by method. We just split and look at the distribution of our visitors by whether they're coming in by air, land, or sea, and we see that mostly, roughly 70 to 72% of the time, we're seeing visitors come in by land, which corroborates with the fact that most of our visitors are actually from our neighboring countries. So that's why that is there. And we have filtering between the two bottom graphs. Sorry, not filtering, I mean highlighting. So we get highlighting there. And we also get highlighting of the bottom left graph into the top left graph. So if you select one of our one of our neighbors that's been split out, you see that their portion of SADC is highlighted up top. So Lesotho has like a smaller portion of SADC. And yeah, that is the Power BI report on international tourism. Thank you.